Number 10. The Relics of St Macrina the Younger. Macrina the Younger was a nun who lived in Turkey during the 4th century. She chose her career path after her fiancé died, and the thought of marrying someone else just didn't feel right. For the rest of her life, she dedicated herself entirely to religion. Macrina's devotion had a major influence on her family. She played a big role in the spiritual education of her brother, who went on to become Saint Gregory of Nyssa. Macrina's family established a monastic community of virgins from various social ranks, including both aristocrats and non-aristocrats. All members, including those who were slaves in their previous lives, had the same rights and freedoms there. Throughout her life, Macrina became known as the standard for what it meant to be an early Christian woman, and her legacy remains very much alive to this day. There's a festival dedicated to her that takes place every year on July 19. Her sarcophagus is housed in a chapel at the Church of St Macrina in Cappadocia, but there are relics of the pioneering nun elsewhere too. Macrina's foot is at the Athenite monastery of Iveron in northern Greece, along with the head of her brother, Saint Gregory, and the hand of a Byzantine bishop known as Basil the Great. There's very little information available online about these relics. Like many other religious treasures, they're certainly not the most pleasant-looking items. And to many, if not most people, the idea of cutting off a dead person's body part and worshipping it is more than a little strange. The Christian tradition of venerating body parts is especially popular in Catholicism. A study from 2006 suggests that there are a few possible reasons for it. The first would be the importance of physical contact in biblical examples of healing. It could have also originated among Egyptian Christians who adhered to the pagan custom of embalming and displaying the bodies of martyrs in their homes. This may have given rise to the tendency for thieves to hack off and steal body parts in order to sell them for a hefty price on the black market. Number 9. Mutilated Vampires. While working at a cemetery near the German border in western Poland last year, archaeologists discovered 3 disturbingly mutilated bodies. Dating back to the 13th and 14th centuries, the remains bore signs of decapitation, deep spine punctures, and other abuse, indicating that people thought they were vampires. One person's head had been wedged between 2 stones to weigh it down and prevent them from rising from the dead. The victims who endured these horrific injuries were not vampires. They suffered from health problems that probably had a stigma attached to them. One woman appears to have a bone condition called kyphosis, which causes a person's back to hunch. She was buried face down with her knees broken. A man found at the site may have also suffered from kyphosis. The haphazard burials are much different from the rest of the cemetery's orderly and organized graves. Most people were buried with their hands laid neatly across their chest or by their sides. It was common at various points in history throughout Europe for people to engage in gory rituals to stop so-called vampires from coming back to life. In addition to wedging a person's head between stones, it was customary to remove a body's legs or pin their neck down with a sickle. People with disabilities and those suffering from cholera and other infectious diseases were prime targets for this gruesome treatment. As archaeologist Leslie Gregorica pointed out in her research, the first person who died during a disease outbreak was usually seen as the one who was most likely to return in vampire form. Berate. Murder Island Bodies. In 1629, a Dutch vessel called the Batavia wrecked 37 miles off of Australia's west coast while en route to Indonesia. Around 60 people died and nearly 300 were left stranded on Beacon Island. When water became scarce, 40 of the survivors staged a brutal months-long mutiny. They were led by the ship's third-in-command and merchant, Hieronymus Cornelis. He dispatched different groups to nearby islands in search of resources while murdering anyone he thought might get in his way, including women and children. 7 women's lives were spared, only for them to be forced into sex slavery. When all was said and done, the mutiny-related death toll was estimated at around 115, earning Beacon Island the nickname of Murder Island. In 2017, nearly 400 years after the chaos went down, archaeologists discovered a communal grave with the remains of 5 people in it. These individuals were laid to rest respectfully, unlike other bodies that have been found, which were clearly buried in a hurry. This indicates that the people in the grave were not killed in the mutiny, but that they perhaps died shortly after the disaster and before the violence began. They might have been lucky for this, because at least they avoided being mercilessly slaughtered by Cornelis. The mutineers were eventually captured, and at first, Cornelis argued that he was just trying to survive, but authorities weren't having it. They tortured him into confessing, and he was hanged alongside 6 of his men. Researchers are still piecing together what can easily be described as one of Australia's bloodiest mutinies of all time. They plan to perform further testing to see what they can learn about the unfortunate souls who perished at Murder Island. Number 7. Isleworth Mona Lisa. You're probably familiar with Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa as one of the most famous paintings of all time. It's instantly recognizable to most people. So can you imagine how strange it would be to see that same exact woman in a different painting? Well, that actually exists. Known as the Isleworth Mona Lisa, there is another painting featuring the same woman with the same enigmatic half-smile we've come to know and love her for. Throughout his career, Da Vinci only painted around 20 works completely on his own, with scholars believing that only 15 of them survive today. The Isleworth Mona Lisa is not considered to be one of them. Experts and art enthusiasts disagree vehemently about whether it's an authentic Da Vinci piece. Many people believe that Da Vinci painted the portrait, including its current owners, who think it was made about 10 years before the Mona Lisa itself. It may have come from one of Da Vinci's workshops, where other painters often worked on or finished his pieces. The Swiss nonprofit group the Mona Lisa organization believes that the painting is 100% authentic, but there are equally credible experts who are convinced it's a fake, including Martin Kemp, a University of Oxford art history professor who specializes in Da Vinci's work. Nobody truly knows who created the Isleworth Mona Lisa, and we may never find out. Do you think there are more Da Vinci works of art hidden somewhere? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 6. St. Oliver Plunkett's head. Oliver Plunkett was a 17th century martyr who became Ireland's first new saint in nearly 700 years, when he was canonized in 1975. In 1997, Plunkett became the country's patron saint for peace and reconciliation. He became a priest in the messy aftermath of the Cromwellian conquest, which saw the persecution and execution of the Catholic clergy. Plunkett was no exception to this bitter treatment and was targeted in a conspiracy to advance hatred against Catholics known as the Popish Plot. He was found guilty of promoting the Roman faith and was sentenced to death. In 1861, 55-year-old Plunkett was hanged and quartered. His body parts were buried in a pair of tin boxes. They were exhumed a few years later and taken to a Benedictine monastery in Germany. From there, Plunkett's head was transported to Rome, then to Northern Ireland. It's been on display in a golden shrine at St. Peter's Church in Drogheda since 1921. Most of the priest's body are in Downside Abbey, England, while the rest are in Germany. Number 5. Tens of thousands of bodies. In 2018, archaeologists were tasked with exhuming and relocating some 40,000 skeletons to make room for a new, high-speed rail line next to Euston Terminal, one of London's busiest train stations. In what was likely the largest excavation of bodies ever undertaken in Britain, the team unearthed the bodies from below St. James Gardens, a sprawling property that functioned as a cemetery from 1788 to 1853. Thanks to the high amount of clay in the ground preventing water damage, many of the coffins and remains were remarkably well preserved. The bodies showed signs of tuberculosis, broken bones, and other traumatic injuries. There was also evidence of dental procedures, including dentures, as well as surgeries, including skulls with saw marks. The discoveries are helping experts learn more about daily life in Britain during one of its most significant historical periods, according to bone expert Mike Henderson. He explained that having such a large data set to study could lead to a better understanding of things like mortality rates and diseases during the time period. Number 4. Death Labyrinth. Located 10,200 feet above sea level in a remote valley of the Peruvian Andes, the 3,000-year-old Chavin de Huantar temple served as a place of worship for the pre-Columbian Chavin culture. While excavating there in 2018, archaeologists uncovered a network of 35 interlocking tunnels dating back to 1200 and 200 BC. They went inside using a tiny remote-controlled robot and discovered the skeletons of 3 people who appeared to have been sacrificed. The trio consisted of a little boy, a teenager, and a man who was between 20 and 30 years old when he died. At least one of them was buried face down beneath piles of rocks, which project leader John Rick described as not very honorable treatment. He further explained that the individuals were probably low-ranking members of society. The tunnels are still being located and explored, so there may be more discoveries waiting to be made. Experts plan to continue studying the site in hopes of determining whether the 3 people they found were sacrificed or what led to their deaths. Number 3. Gabiyan Mummy Caves. During the 20th century, loggers discovered hundreds of coffins and human remains inside a series of ancient burial caves outside of the Philippine capital of Manila. The graves belong to the Ibaloy tribe and date back to between 1200 and 1500 AD. Shortly before a tribe member passed away, they drank a salty beverage to kickstart the mummification process. After they died, their body was cleansed, prepared with herbs, and heated over a several-week period. This involved placing the deceased person over a fire in a seated position while blowing tobacco smoke into their mouth to dry out their organs. Then the corpse was placed in a fetal position inside a decorative oval-shaped wooden coffin. This practice ended after the Spanish arrived in the Philippines, and the burials were left undisturbed until they were rediscovered in the early 1900s. They were designated a national cultural treasure, but not a lot was done to protect the graves. Over time, the burials were looted, vandalized, infested with insects, and riddled with fungal growth. In an effort to prevent more damage, the government has avoided disclosing the location of the tombs, but people still manage to find them. Getting there requires a 5-hour drive into the mountains, followed by an arduous 5-hour hike up a series of stone steps. Not everyone who visits the mummies has bad intentions. Locals continue to pay their respects by bringing prepared meals, which help ensure that the deceased are well fed in the afterlife. Number 2. A pit of amputated arms. In 2012, archaeologists working near the German border in France unexpectedly discovered a 6,000-year-old pit filled with amputated human arms, fingers, and hands. They were performing routine work ahead of a construction project in the village of Bergheim when they made the grisly find. 14 of the property's ancient pits or silos contained human bones, but one hole stood out from the rest. In it were at least 7 severed arms bearing amputation marks from a knife or an axe. One of the limbs belonged to a child between the ages of 12 and 16 years old. After tossing the arms into the pit, someone dumped at least 2 adults and 4 children in there, including a baby less than a year old. The remains of a middle-aged man who'd had his arm cut off showed telltale signs of repeated blows to the head, which proved fatal. Archaeologist Fanny Chanel, who co-authored a study of the gruesome site, wrote that the discovery did not help experts better understand the ancient people's everyday lives. Instead, it forced them to focus on a single event. The team failed to determine what caused the violence. They believe it may have resulted from warfare or a judicial sentencing. The unfortunate people found in the pit were most likely farmers and animal herders who lived in villages, and their brutal deaths indicate that there was a dark side to social hierarchies found in some Neolithic societies. Number 1. Mummified Lung. The Basilica of Saint Denis in Paris is the burial site of many French kings. In 1959, archaeologist Michael Fleury discovered a mummified lung inside of a stone sarcophagus at the site. Along with it were a skeleton, jewelry, cloth, and leather fragments, and a strand of hair. The remains belong to the Merovingian Queen Arnegund, who lived from 515 to 580 AD. She was one of King Clotair's 6 wives and the mother of King Chilperic. Experts identified her based on a gold ring they found, bearing the inscription Arnegundis. For decades, experts wondered if Queen Arnegund's lung mummified naturally or if someone deliberately embalmed it. They were confused because it was the only part of her body that was preserved. A team of researchers solved the mystery in 2016 when they identified a copper belt on Arnegund's corpse as the preserving agent. As it decayed, the belt deposited large amounts of copper oxide throughout the lung, which scientists detected during a biopsy. This had an embalming effect on the organ. They also found that Queen Arnegund's body was injected with a fluid made from a combination of spices and aromatic plants, which may have also helped preserve her lung. Number 11. India's Hanging Pillar. Lapakshi Temple in Andhra Pradesh, India is considered a marvel of ancient Indian architecture. The 16th century structure is filled with statues of gods, goddesses, musicians, and dancers. Hundreds of paintings depicting scenes from Hindu epics cover the walls, columns, and ceiling. There are around 70 stone pillars supporting the roof of the temple's dance hall. Legend has it that they were designed to withstand earthquakes. One of the pillars doesn't even touch the ground, but instead hangs from the ceiling. There is a wafer-thin gap between its base and the floor, where a sheet of paper or cloth can easily pass through, creating an incredible illusion that the pillar is floating. Nobody knows how or why the pillar is situated like this, although many have tried to figure it out. According to one story, a British engineer supposedly moved the pillar in an attempt to understand what supports it. In doing so, he dislodged the pillar, leaving it in its current position. Another legend claims that members of the British government tried to move the pillar to do some repairs, but realized it wasn't possible. Consequently, it was left the way it remains today. There's no telling which, if either story is true, and the hanging pillar continues to fascinate visitors at the Lapakshi Temple, which is famous for its ornate architecture and beautiful artwork. Number 10. Viking Twilight Compass. As the Vikings sailed through the North Atlantic along the 1,600-mile journey from Norway to Greenland, they navigated using an ancient compass called the Unartak Disk. Measuring just 2.76 inches in diameter, the small wooden partial disc was discovered in an 11th century covenant in Greenland in 1948. It was originally thought to be a decoration or a sundial, but in 2014, researchers performed tests that revealed that it could have been used as a nighttime compass called a Twilight board. By using the Unartak disc in combination with other instruments, the Vikings would have been able to navigate for nearly an hour after sunset around the time of the spring equinox. They would have needed a pair of stones called sunstones, which determined the sun's position, and something called a shadow stick, which identified their cardinal direction. Neither of these items were discovered along with the Unartak disc, but medieval records indicate that sunstones and shadow sticks were available to the Vikings, making this nighttime navigation theory entirely plausible. Number 9. Hypoc Cost. The earliest known form of central heating was developed over 2,000 years ago in ancient Rome. Known as the Hypoc Cost, the system was powered by furnaces that burned constantly. Homes that were equipped with a Hypoc Cost were built 2 feet off the ground. The furnaces were installed beneath, and hot air circulated through the space beneath the house. As the hot air cooled, it escaped the building through flues in the walls and roof vents. In addition to providing warmth, Hypoc Cost systems were also used for creating saunas by putting a pool into the room. The furnace heated the water, causing steam to rise up into the air. The room's temperature easily reached 100 degrees Fahrenheit or higher, with the humidity peaking at 100%. Allowing smoke from a Hypoc Cost to leak into a house would have put a home's occupants at risk of carbon monoxide poisoning. The Romans were careful to ensure that this didn't happen. Hypoc systems were built by skilled engineers who knew what they were doing, but making sure they were safe also meant they were expensive, and only the wealthy could usually afford one for their home. They were more commonly used in bathhouses, which functioned as major social centers in ancient Rome. Number 8. The first robot. Most people only think of robots in a modern sense, but their history dates back to over 2,000 years to the flying pigeon, a self-propelled steam-powered device that was created between 400 and 350 BC. It was the invention of an ancient Greek scientist and philosopher named Archytas, who was a good friend of Plato. Archytas is credited with being the founder of mathematical mechanics, or what we now call mechanical engineering, and he designed the flying pigeon as part of a study on how birds fly. The steam-powered robo-bird was made from wood and suspended from a pivot bar. It had a hollow and cylindrical lightweight body with 2 sets of wings, along with an airtight heated boiler in its rear. The boiler generated steam and pressure, which eventually defeated the machine's mechanical resistance and caused it to take flight. The flying pigeon traveled for nearly 660 feet before running out of steam, making it the first ever self-propelled flying device, and in some sense, the world's earliest robot. The experiment also marked one of the first known recorded instances of a scientist studying bird flight. And while the mechanics behind it are rather simple, the flying pigeon was considered highly advanced at the time of its creation. Hey, real quick, if you're new to the channel, welcome. Give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more cool videos like this. Number 7. Ulbert Sword. Between 800 and 1000 AD, the Vikings manufactured a lightweight, razor-sharp, and flexible sword that appears to have been made with technology that wasn't readily available until some 800 years later. Around 170 of the swords, all of them engraved with the word Ulbert, have been found. They were made from iron ore that had to be heated to 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit to remove impurities. To strengthen the metal, it was mixed with carbon, effectively turning it into steel. At the time, people had no way of heating something to such a high temperature. The technology to do this wasn't available on a large scale until the 19th and 20th centuries, during the Industrial Revolution. Instead, people usually hammered the impurities out of their swords. But the Vikings somehow found a way to create swords that had no impurities and contained 3 times more carbon than any other metals at the time. Known as crucible steel, the mixture was likely made in the Kingdom of Francia, near modern-day France and Germany. But the identity of the sword maker is a mystery, and the exact process they use for making crucible steel is unknown. Researchers believe they may have borrowed techniques from Arab blacksmiths who made similar high-quality material called Damascus steel. The swords may have also been made using steel imported from India or the Arab empires. Number 6. Roman concrete. Modern concrete is the world's most widely used building material. It's been around since the 18th century and is a relatively simple mixture containing cement, water, sand, and rocks. Ancient Persians, Egyptians, Assyrians, and Romans all favored their own versions of concrete. It was especially popular in the Roman Empire, which is credited with perfecting the material. Roman concrete is extremely resilient. Some of the structures they built with it are still standing today, over 1,000 years after the empire fell. This is pretty impressive, especially considering how modern concrete can break down in as little as 50 years. Scientists found that philipsite and another incredibly rare mineral called aluminum tobermarite had formed in the concrete where volcanic ash had dissolved, causing the material to strengthen over time. The Romans may have poured salt water into the mixture, causing it to react with volcanic ash and produce the strengthening minerals. But this process takes centuries, and scientists have yet to develop a similar but quicker forming solution. Number 5. Lycurgus Cup. The Lycurgus Cup is a 4th century Roman chalice that appears jade green when light passes through it from the front and blood red when illuminated from behind. It's made of dichroic glass, which changes color depending on the way the light strikes it. The 1600-year-old cup is the only complete Roman artifact made from the material, and it displays the most impressive color-changing qualities out of any known artifacts. For decades after the British Museum acquired the cup in the 1950s, scientists struggled to understand the dynamics behind its chameleon effect. They came one step closer to solving the puzzle in 1990 when they examined the glass under a microscope and discovered that it was infused with silver and gold particles that were ground down to less than 1,000th the size of a grain of table salt. The mixture was precise, indicating that the Romans created the chalice's color-changing characteristics on purpose. In this sense, they were early pioneers of nanotechnology. Light causes the electrons in the metal flecks to vibrate, transforming the cup's color depending on the viewer's angle. Acting on the suspicion that different liquids would also affect the artifact's color, researchers mimicked the technology on a small plastic plate and exposed it to water, oil, sugar, and salt solutions. The plate displayed an array of distinctive shades, meaning that the cup would react similarly if it were put to the same test. Number 4. Automata. The mathematician and engineer Harappan of Alexandria lived and worked sometime between the 1st and 3rd centuries. He invented numerous impressive machines, including the world's first automated vending machine, a coin-operated holy water dispenser, and an organ that was powered by a wind wheel, which was the earliest known wind-powered machine. Harappan also developed one of the first robots, known as an automaton. One of his first automata was a mobile shrine dedicated to the god Dionysus, featuring figurines of the god and his worshippers. It was situated on a wheeled base which rolled to a specific point and displayed a religious scene using the figurines. Another one of Harappan's robots was a miniature theater which featured a tragedy from beginning to end. These machines essentially operated on clockwork by using a descending counterweight and various cords and axles to make the scene unfold. Harappan is considered one of the most influential early pioneers of engineering, math, geometry, and physics. His other inventions include an automatic temple door opener, which worked using heat and pneumatics, and a steam engine called the Yalopile, which is perhaps his most famous creation. Number 3. Yakchal. Modern refrigeration technology is relatively new. Its very beginnings date back to 1834, and the first refrigerators for home use were made in 1913. It wasn't until the 1930s that they became a common household appliance. But ancient people developed their own ingenious ways of keeping perishables cold as early as 1000 BC. Starting around 400 BC, various civilizations who lived in hotter climates began using what is known as a yakchal. These large dome-shaped devices were made of a special insulating mortar called saruj, which contained sand, clay, egg whites, goat hair, lime, and ash. They cooled the air through evaporation. Yakchals were insulated by walls measuring up to 6.5 feet tall, along with cool water that was channeled into the structure. These sophisticated devices kept ice cold year-round, even in scorching hot desert climates. They were equipped with trenches where melted ice water collected and refroze overnight. The ice was used for cooling certain foods on hot days, such as desserts that were traditionally served frozen. These delicacies were not just reserved for royalty, they were available to commoners, thanks to the yakchal being a common household item at the time. Number 2. Hypium of Hal Safieni. The Hypium of Hal Safieni is an ancient complex of underground chambers in Malta. Dating back between 4000 and 2500 BC, it was likely used as a sanctuary and a burial site. It's one of Europe's only known Neolithic necropolises, and some experts believe that it's the world's oldest prehistoric underground temple. The 3-level, ornately decorated structure was carved directly into the surrounding limestone. Each chamber was used for a different purpose. There was a temple, a cemetery, and a funeral hall. The oracle chamber is perhaps the most fascinating part of the Hypogeum. In this room words spoken at a normal volume are amplified and can be heard throughout the entire building. The acoustics can be scientifically explained, but researchers struggle to understand why the chamber was built and if the amplifying effect was intentional. Some people believe the chamber may have been used by a prophetic priest called an oracle, possibly to affect people's psyches or to enhance mystical experiences during rituals. Number 1. Flexible glass. The Phoenicians made the first man-made glass, but historians credit the Romans with perfecting the art of glassmaking. Various Roman texts describe the creation of something called vitrum flexile, or flexible glass, during the reign of Tiberius Caesar. It is mentioned in Pliny the Elder's Natural History, as well as the Satyricon. Pliny the Elder's encyclopedic description of flexible glass discusses how Tiberius Caesar banned the material to keep the value of precious metals like gold, silver, and copper from plummeting. The author admitted that the story's truthfulness is questionable, but the tale nevertheless spread widely and persisted for a long time. Authored by a man named Petronius, Satyricon's account of flexible glass describes how its inventor demonstrated the technology to Tiberius by throwing a cup on the ground. To the emperor's surprise, it didn't break. It was dented from the impact of hitting the floor, so the glassmaker used a small hammer to reshape it. After learning that the inventor was the only person who knew how to make flexible glass, Tiberius reportedly executed him to ensure that he took the recipe for it to the grave. Modern researchers don't think that flexible glass ever really existed, but they tried to figure out what it would have been made of if it did. For example, if the glassmaker had gotten his hands on some boric oxide, it would have greatly strengthened the material, but this fails to explain the flexibility of the glass. Even if flexible glass was real, there is a very real chance that we'll never know what it was made from, since it's so scarcely mentioned in historical records.
Number 11. The Dark Sarcophagus. In 2018, archaeologists unearthed the largest sarcophagus ever found within the ancient city of Alexandria. People immediately began speculating about what was inside the huge granite coffin. Some believed that it contained the long-lost remains of Alexander the Great. Others thought that there was a curse inside, and that opening the sarcophagus would unleash it. But of course, scientists went ahead and opened it anyway. The box was 8.5 foot by 5 foot. In it, they found the skeletons of 2 men and 1 woman, immersed in putrid red sewage that had seeped into the coffin from a nearby apartment building. The bones were placed into the sarcophagus at different times. There was a hole in one of the men's skulls, indicating that he had survived ancient brain surgery or had been shot in the head with an arrow. The remains date back to either sometime between 332 BC and 30 BC during the Greek-ruled Ptolemaic dynasty, or from 30 BC to 642 AD when Rome ruled Egypt. Researchers don't know who the individuals were or why they were buried in such a large coffin, and hope to learn more about the mysterious trio through DNA testing and CT scans. Number 10. Magnificent Burial. Less than 2,000 years ago, when Rome ruled Egypt, a woman named Demetria was laid to rest in an ornately decorated tomb at Saqqara. Archaeologists discovered her burial in 2019 and were fascinated by what they saw. Demetria's grave contains a carving of her wearing a white dress and carrying grapes, while a pet of an unknown species looks up at her. A Greek inscription on the image translates to, Demetria, daughter of Menelaus, granddaughter of Ammonia, worthy, farewell. Ammonia was most likely Demetria's paternal grandmother, according to Roman Egypt expert Roger Bagnall, who deciphered the inscriptions for Life Science. He further explained that the girl's paternal grandfather may have been considered illegitimate, since his name is absent from the carving. Another etching inside Demetria's burial shows the deities Thoth, Seth, and Anubis. It's accompanied by an inscription about her father, Menelaus. The carving contains the rarely used words therapeutes, indicating that Menelaus was a servant of the gods, rather than mortals. Number 9. What ancient Egyptians looked like. Scientists successfully reconstructed a mummy's genome for the first time in 2017 when they extracted DNA from 3 men who were buried in the ancient city of Absur el-Melek, sometime between 1380 BC and 425 AD. The information helped researchers to reconstruct the trio's faces, offering the first ever glimpse at what someone living in ancient Egypt over 2,000 years ago may have looked like. Using a method of genetic analysis called forensic DNA phenotyping, the team created 3D models of the mummies' faces. The process works by predicting certain aspects of a person's appearance, like the shape of the face, based on their DNA. Scientists determined that the man had light brown skin with dark brown hair and eyes. They are more genetically similar to people in the Mediterranean or Middle East than people living in modern Egypt, according to a statement from Parabon Nanolabs, the company that performed the analysis. Ellen Greytak, the director of bioinformatics, told Life Science that working with ancient DNA is complicated because it's often degraded or mixed with bacterial DNA. In cases where there are important pieces missing from a DNA sample, scientists rely on nearby information to predict what the missing pieces contained. The technology isn't foolproof, but it's also a lot more than just a guessing game. It's a useful tool for bringing us closer to our past. Whose DNA do you think scientists are most interested in studying, and why? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 8. Pink Pharaoh Statue. In late 2019, archaeologists discovered a rare pink granite statue of the pharaoh Ramesses II near the Giza pyramids west of Cairo. They also found a miniature limestone sphinx while excavating the property of a man who was caught illegally hunting for treasure. The 3.5-foot tall, 1.8-foot wide statue is one of the rarest ancient Egyptian discoveries ever made. It's the first known sculpture of its kind made from granite. A hieroglyphic on the back of the artifact translates to strong bull. This is a testament to the ruler's strength and vitality, according to Mustafa Waziri, Secretary General of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities. He further explained that the statue was meant to serve as a resting place for the Ka, or life force after death. Also known as Ramesses the Great, Ramesses II ruled Egypt from 1279 BC to 1213 BC during the 19th dynasty. He's thought to be the pharaoh in the biblical Exodus story. During his 60-year reign, he vastly expanded the empire. Ramesses II lived to around 90 years old, vastly outliving the average ancient Egyptian's life expectancy of no more than 40 years. He built more monuments and had more children than any other pharaoh. Number 7. Hexu Origins. A mysterious dynasty called the Hyksos ruled Egypt from 1638 BC to 1530 BC. For a long time, experts believed that they were foreigners who invaded the region and took over. But new evidence recently revealed that the Hyksos may have come from within Egypt all along. Researchers performed a chemical analysis on some teeth from Hyksos graves and found that the alleged first foreigners to rule Egypt had already been there for several generations before coming to power. Written records of the Hyksos are incredibly scarce. During the 3rd century BC, long after they fell out of power, a Ptolemaic priest named Manetho wrote that Hyksos invaded Egypt from the northeast after the Middle Kingdom fell around 1650 BC. Ancient hieroglyphs describe it as a tumultuous and unstable period, but it's hard to know what to believe. Dynasties that ruled after the Hyksos destroyed records and spread propaganda about previous rulers, earning the Hyksos a disorderly and chaotic reputation. Excavations at their capital city Avaris suggest that the Hyksos may have originated in the Middle East. Tombs found at the ancient site contain evidence of an interesting mixture of Egyptian and non-Egyptian burial customs. New findings show that the Hyksos were a distinct ethnic group who originated in different regions and migrated to Egypt in waves. Most of the men whose teeth were analyzed as part of the study arrived in the area before the Hyksos came to power. These discoveries challenge the long-standing belief that the Hyksos entered Egypt as a unified invading force. There were also many female remains at the site, which made scientists realize that they need to further investigate the roles women played in Hyksos society. Number 6. A new queen. Earlier this year, archaeologists discovered the 4,200-year-old tomb of a previously unknown queen at the ancient necropolis of Saqqara. The funerary temple was found near the pyramid of King Teti and contains inscriptions identifying the woman as his wife and daughter, Queen Nate. Until then, researchers believed that King Teti only had two wives, named Iput I and Kuit II. Back in 2010, the team discovered a pyramid that they only recently realized was dedicated to Queen Niet. And there are more fascinating sites and artifacts nearby, waiting to be unearthed. Archaeologist and team leader Zahi Hawass told the press that only 30% of Saqqara has been excavated, and that most of the sprawling site remains buried for now. He also said that discoveries like this are rewriting ancient Egyptian history, especially when it comes to the New Kingdom's 18th and 19th dynasties, during which time King Teti ruled. In addition to discovering Queen Nate's funerary chamber, the team found an array of New Kingdom artifacts dating back roughly 3,000 years. The collection includes figurines, pottery, dozens of mummies, and 54 colorful coffins. It marked the first time wooden coffins from the New Kingdom were found at Saqqara, according to Supreme Council of Antiquities Chief Mustafa Waziri. The sheer number of discoveries happening here and elsewhere throughout Egypt reminds us of how little we truly know about the ancient Egyptians and how much we have yet to learn. Number 5. Petitearcophagus. While excavating a tomb complex in Egypt's Baharia Oasis in 2010, archaeologists unearthed an unusually small sarcophagus depicting a wide-eyed woman wearing a tunic. It was the first Roman-style mummy ever found in the region, and the only mummy of its type among the site's 14 burials, which date back to around 2,000 years ago during the Greco-Roman era. Experts initially believed that the 3.2-foot-long sarcophagus belonged to a child, but its elaborate features, including eyes containing colored stones, a headscarf, bracelet, shoes, and beaded necklace, indicated that the remains belonged to a wealthy and influential adult. Speaking with National Geographic, Mohammed Afifi of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities said that he initially thought the mummy was a dwarf, but that researchers don't know for sure who she was or how old she was. Number 4. Spelling mistakes. Ancient Egyptian scribes were entrusted with highly important tasks, like record keeping and communicating. They began their training during childhood, learning under a master scribe who taught them how to write letters, wills, tax forms, and other documents. Scribes used writing boards to practice their penmanship by copying texts. Writing boards were often reused and passed through the hands of many students. A writing board dating back sometime between 1981 and 1802 BC, during the Middle Kingdom period, shows that teachers corrected their students' work much like they do now. A student named Inisu used to write a letter to his brother, Pe Nisu. The writing reflects a simplified cursive hieroglyphic style that was developed around 3000 BC to make it easier for scribes to compose lengthy administrative and religious documents. Inisu's teacher marked and corrected his mistakes with red ink, much like modern teachers do when they grade papers. Discoveries like this show that even though our lives are much different from how people lived during the ancient world, we do have a few things in common. Number 3. Pharaoh mummy portraits. During the late 19th century, British archaeologist W.M. Flinders Petrie discovered 150 portraits buried with mummies in a Roman-era cemetery in Egypt's Fayum Oasis region. Dating back to the 1st century BC, the paintings were made on wood panels. They display eerily lifelike qualities and reflect a confusing combination of Egyptian, Roman, and Greek customs, leaving experts puzzled. The artwork sat in storage for decades, receiving very little attention from the academic community. Portraits are rarely found in Egypt's historical record. The Getty Museum conservator Marie Svoboda recognized their value when she started the Ancient Panel Paintings Examination, Analysis, and Research Project in 2013. Her goal was to compile a database of the little-studied mummy portraits that are scattered throughout the world. The project is helping researchers learn more about the artwork by looking for patterns in the materials, painting styles, and other characteristics. They found that the portraits were created in studios, with multiple artists often working on the same piece. The paintings were made with imported materials, reflecting Egypt's vast trading connections. Portraits that can be traced to their mummy show that the individuals passed away at the age they are depicted as in the image, meaning the pictures were created around the time of death. There are many lingering, unanswered questions about the artwork. As the database continues to grow, each promising lead leaves experts with new mysteries to solve. Number 2. Mud Mummy. In 1860, someone donated a mummy to the University of Sydney in Australia. It wasn't until 1999 that experts performed a CT scan and noticed something strange inside the sarcophagus. They extracted some of the wrappings and found that they were covered in a sandy, mud-like mixture, which has never been seen in any other burial. Another team of researchers examined the mummy in 2017 and found that the person inside did not match the sarcophagus. The mummy dates back to around 1207 BC, but the coffin was created in 1000 BC, making it nearer than its occupant. Antiquities traders probably put the wrong body into the sarcophagus because they could make more money by selling a complete set, rather than selling the mummy and the coffin separately. The team believes that the woman was encased in mud as a money-saving way of preparing someone of a low social status for the afterlife. Mummification was costly and time-consuming, and it typically required imported materials. Not everyone could afford it. Although this is the only mud mummy ever found, it indicates that there were low-cost, locally sourced alternatives for people who needed an affordable burial. Number 1. Gilded Mummy. While excavating at Saqqara in 2018, archaeologists uncovered a tomb complex containing a mummification workshop, mummies, sarcophagi, and a silver face mask gilded with gold. There are several underground burial shafts, with some measuring over 100 feet deep. The silver mask dates back to sometime between 664 BC and 404 BC, and is one of several artifacts at the site that are believed to be at least 2,500 years old. Its haunting eyes are made from calcite, obsidian, and a black gemstone. Team leader Ramadan Badri Hussain described the mask as a sensation and said that very few precious metal artifacts have survived into the present due to looting. It belongs to a mummy who was found inside a badly damaged coffin, bearing an image of the goddess Mut. Based on what's left of the writing on the casket, researchers believe that the mummy was a priest who served the deity. Inside the mummification workshop, the team found bowls and measuring cups bearing the names of substances that were used in the mummifying process, as well as 2 large basins that were used for preparing mummies. Excavations are ongoing, and there could be more exciting discoveries to come. Number 10. The Sea Peoples. The Sea Peoples are one of the least understood ancient civilizations that thrived in the Mediterranean region, but for only about 100 years. They sprang up in the year 1276 BC, and then mysteriously vanished in 1178 BC, though not before being one of the largest reasons for the Bronze Age collapse. The thing with the Sea Peoples is that they were less of a civilization and more of a confederacy. They were a group of naval raiders from coastal towns who got together and decided to cause mass mayhem. Specifically, they concentrated their destructive efforts on Egypt. Nobody knows exactly what ethnicity these people were, and our only sources of information come from Egyptian descriptions of battles in which sea people showed up and caused devastation. Historians believe they could have been rogue tribes from Mycenaean or even Minoan, but nobody really knows for sure. Ramesses II gave the most information on the Sea Peoples, describing how they completely annihilated them after they pillaged just about every major port in the Mediterranean. Before trying to invade Egypt, they did so much damage in the region, they caused an almost total collapse of civilization for hundreds of years. Number 9. The Mycenaeans. The Mycenaeans are an ancient civilization from what is today Greece. In fact, the Mycenaeans are considered to be the original Greek people. They were the first civilization to speak the Greek language, popping up on the Greek mainland somewhere around 1650 BC. Sure, they were influenced by the earlier Minoan civilization that lived on the island of Crete, copying much of the writing system, their social structure, and their artwork, but they were the original Greeks for all intents and purposes. Later on, when Greek civilization flourished, they would look back on the Mycenaeans as legends, They looked to their old palaces and megalithic structures and told stories of the lost civilization that came years before them. They even believed the Mycenaeans were a race of super giants, since the palaces they built were so big, it seemed impossible for ordinary men to have constructed them. But like the Minoans who came before them, the Mycenaeans ultimately vanished from the history books. It wasn't until 1876 that the archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann discovered proof of the Mycenaeans high up in the Greek mountains. He uncovered artifacts of the lost civilization, as well as palaces and tombs. And thanks to him, we know exactly where the Greek culture comes from. Number 8. The Grand Canyon Forbidden Zone. In the year 1909, there was a newspaper article published by the Arizona Gazette stating that explorers in the Grand Canyon uncovered ancient artifacts from people in Egypt. The article explained that an explorer by the name of G.E. Kincaid, along with Smithsonian scientist S.A. Jordan, uncovered man-made tunnels deep in the Grand Canyon filled with Egyptian relics. They uncovered golden urns, copper tools, hieroglyphics, and even mummies. At the time, these discoveries were labeled as proof that the ancient Egyptians had made their way to North America and started their own city in the Grand Canyon. But here's the deal. No one knows where any of those artifacts are today. Some theories say that the Smithsonian scientists came in and took every last scrap of evidence away. Though of course, the Smithsonian denies this fervently. They say the article was just 20th century nonsense. But the fact remains that there is a forbidden zone in the Grand Canyon, where ordinary people are not allowed to go. There are also no-fly orders over specific parts of the Grand Canyon, almost as if nobody wants ordinary people to see what's hidden in the deep valleys. What do you think is hiding in the Grand Canyon? Why do you think this information is kept so hush-hush? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below. And if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 7. Where is Atlantis? One of the most mysterious civilizations is that of Atlantis. The island nation was first described by the Greek writer Plato 2,400 years ago. He described it as an imperial superpower of the ancient world, possessing one of the largest armies and some of the most advanced technologies of the day. But unfortunately for the Atlanteans, they fell out of favor with the gods, and their great island was tossed into the sea. For the last 2,000 years, there's been a lot of argument over whether Atlantis was a real civilization or not. Some claim it was simply a fictional city-state made up by Plato, while others believe it's very real. But if it's real, just where exactly is it? There are a few theories, though keep in mind none of them have ever been confirmed. Based on Plato's description of Atlantis, it was located somewhere near the Mediterranean Sea. It could have been on the island of Sardinia, Malta, Cyprus, Crete, or even Santorini. Some even believe Atlantis is on the bottom of the Cyprus basin, undetectable under nearly a mile of water and thousands of tons of sediment. What do you think? Where could it be if it truly exists? Number 6. The Harappan. The Harappan civilization flourished between 3,300 and 1,300 BC, extending their great empire from modern Afghanistan to Pakistan, and even further into northwest India. You may also know them by their other name, the Indus River Valley Civilization. They were one of the most advanced people in the entire world, introducing a standardized system of weights and measurements for trade, learning how to work with copper and bronze, and creating their very own script. They also had unique systems of government, and like many of the ancient civilizations of the Old World, the Harappan vanished, probably because of climate change. The first trace of these ancient people was discovered in 1856 by British colonial officials overseeing the construction of a railway line that would connect the city of Lahore and Karachi. They found hundreds of thousands of bricks under the ground, which they actually used to help construct their own buildings. It wasn't until the 1920s that archaeologists really got involved and realized they were dealing with something big. After a lot of research, we now know today that the Indian civilization likely came from the Harappan. When their cities were abandoned around the year 1800, they likely migrated south and spread throughout India. Number 5. The lost civilization of Mu. Nobody knows if the mysterious land of Mu was ever actually a real place or not. First mention of this unknown land came from Augustus Leplungion, After investigating Mayan ruins in Yucatan, eerie similarities between ruins in Mexico, Greece, and Egypt, and proposed there must have been a civilization that connected them. He proposed that there was once a large landmass in the Pacific Ocean called Mu, and it allowed contact between the civilizations of South America and those in the Mediterranean. Since then, many scholars have run with this idea, believing it was through the lost land of Mu that all these ancient cultures managed to come up with similar symbols, similar pieces of architecture, and almost identical myths. If real, the lost civilization of Mu would be a reasonable explanation for why there are so many historical coincidences all throughout the ancient world. But unfortunately, nobody has ever found evidence of this land. It's been compared to Atlantis, with many believing Mu sank long ago and is currently hidden somewhere deep in the Pacific Ocean. Number 4. The Buried Pyramid. A huge pyramid-like structure on the Indonesian island of Java may just be proof of a lost civilization. The mysterious structure was discovered atop Mount Padang, with some experts saying it could be one of the oldest megalithic sites on Earth. This place is so old that it's covered by a dense layer of soil, foliage, and even trees. It was likely built over 12,000 years ago, so nature has reclaimed it almost entirely. It was only found after workers took drilling samples from the top of the pyramid, which, from the outside, simply looks like a mountain. They found that below the vegetation and soil, there is a subterranean structure. Underneath the surface, about 10 feet down, was a second layer of similar rock columns, thought to be 7,500 to 8,300 years old. And a third layer, reaching 49 feet below the surface, is more than 9,000 years old. And according to researchers, it could even date to 28,000 years ago. Their study also detected multiple chambers underground. Unfortunately, nobody has really gone in to actually dig the pyramid out yet. It's still completely encased in soil. Plus, most mainstream scientists have yet to acknowledge that there is an ancient pyramid, over twice as old as those in Egypt, hiding on an Indonesian island. But according to Danny Natawajaja with the Research Center for Geotechnology at the Indonesian Institute for Sciences, the pyramid is legit. Danny has been studying it for years and believes it's evidence of a civilization from prehistory, an early group of humans that built structures thousands of years before any other group on Earth. They have no name. Nobody knows when they existed or where they went. And so far, this pyramid is the only proof we have that they were ever real. Number 3. The Aztecs. When Spanish forces arrived in Mexico in the year 1521, they did their best to wipe out just about everyone. This includes the most famous ancient civilization from what is today modern Mexico, the Aztec. We know that the crusading Spanish tore down their temples and built Christian churches over top of them. We know they slaughtered them by the thousands. But what you might not know is that the Aztec are still alive today. They just live their lives a little differently than their ancestors did 5 centuries ago. The truth is that the Aztec people were not completely wiped out. Today, the descendants of the mighty Aztecs are called Nahua. There are more than 500,000 Nahua still living in small communities throughout rural Mexico, far from the warriors they once were. These modern Aztecs spend their days farming and selling traditional crafts to tourists. They also no longer believe in the ancient Mesoamerican gods. Their beliefs have fused with Christianity, meaning that while they go to church, they also sometimes practice medicine by uttering incantations and participating in blood sacrifices. Though in modern times, they only sacrifice chickens, not people. Number 2. The Lost Civilizations of the Amazon. Thanks to satellite images, researchers have uncovered proof of an ancient civilization that once flourished deep in the Amazon jungle. In fact, there may even have been several different civilizations that lived here. Hundreds and hundreds of geometric shapes have been found in the Amazon basin, taking up an area of about 155 miles in any direction. These shapes are the leftovers of buildings and earthworks, and even roads connecting one village to another. Even though all traces of the original buildings are gone, their imprints remain. Scientists are now beginning to understand there was a major pre-Columbian power residing in the jungle as far back as 1250 AD. There may have been up to 1 million people living in the area, according to National Geographic. The big mystery now is trying to figure out what happened to these people. How did a civilization with a population of 1 million just vanish? Experts are still working to understand how the Amazonian civilization broke apart, resulting in hundreds of small tribes living primitive existences in the jungle for hundreds of years after. Number 1. Easter Island. The civilization of Easter Island has captured the imagination of scholars, archaeologists, and pretty much everyone on Earth. They are known as the Rapa Nui, and nobody really knows what happened to them. We know that they probably came from Polynesia or South America. But why a small group of people traveled 1,300 miles from the mainland to live on a small island only 64 square miles still baffles experts. The experts also don't understand why the natives moved here and then built giant stone statues, which you probably know as the Easter Island heads, all over the landscape. It was a remarkable achievement, but one that doesn't make a lot of sense. It's believed that the Easter Island people used so many resources to build the statues, what they called moai, that they actually ran out, ultimately leading to their decline. One of the main theories as to how the Rapa Nui people vanished comes from the geographer Jared Diamond. He claims that Rapa Nui is a perfect example of humans exploiting the natural resources to such a point that they can no longer sustain themselves. Basically, the island went from tens of thousands of people to a small population of only 1,500 by the time the Europeans discovered the island in the 18th century. They cut down the trees, ruined their fields, and ran out of wood, primarily because they were so obsessed with building the huge statues. What's your favorite lost civilization? Number 9. Encyclopedia Obscura. Mythical creatures are considered fictional. Many originated from people's misunderstandings of real plants, animals, places, and even other humans. But is it possible that any of them actually exist? The Maryland Cryptid Museum in London thinks so. It claims to own a collection of cryptid corpses, including aliens, dragons, mermaids, gnomes, fairies, vampires, and more. The dead creatures were supposedly found in boxes in the basement of a mansion owned by an eccentric cryptozoologist named Thomas Theodore Maryland. Whether or not they're actually real is a matter of speculation. But the collection is not open to the public, leaving us to guess based on photos. The museum's Encyclopedia Obscura contains descriptions of all the items in its collection and key players in the cryptozoology realm. It describes Maryland as a man who spent his life searching for cryptids. He opened the original museum, but it was met with widespread disapproval and turned into an orphanage. Maryland was allegedly never seen again after that. After the photos appeared online, people figured out that they were posted by a sculptor and photographer known as Alex CF. It appears as though the backstory and cryptid corpses were a historical hoax. But to some people, this doesn't mean the creatures don't exist or that there's no truth to the Encyclopedia Obscura. Number 8. Devil's Bible. Measuring nearly 3 feet long, the Codex Gigas is the world's largest existing medieval manuscript. It's nicknamed the Devil's Bible and dates back to the 13th century. This huge book contains the Old and New Testaments, as well as numerous short texts about matters that were relevant at the time, including calendars, exorcisms, grammar, and medical topics. It's filled with disturbing artwork, including at least one full-color rendering of the devil himself, hence its nickname. Researchers believe that a monk hand-wrote the Codex Gigas without anyone's help, but they don't really know who he was, and it would have been a massive undertaking for one person to create the entire manuscript. The National Library of Sweden explains on its website that it would have taken someone 5 years to write the book if they wrote for 6 hours a day, 6 days a week. Assuming the writer was a monk who was busy with his monastic duties and could only write for 3 hours a day, it would have taken him 10 years to complete the Codex Gigas. The mysterious manuscript was originally stored in a Benedictine monastery in what is now the Czech Republic. It's currently on display at the National Library of Sweden in Stockholm. Number 7. Ora Linda Book. During the 1860s, the public learned of a manuscript called the Ora Linda Book. It's written in a West Germanic language called Old Frisian, which was used between the 8th and 16th centuries. The book is said to cover historical, mythological, and religious themes of the Frisian people between 2194 BC and 803 AD. It includes details about numerous alleged catastrophes and mentions the so-called lost city of Atlantis. After the book's existence became widely known, a controversy ensued over its authenticity, or lack thereof. Toward the end of the 19th century, most people believed that it was a recently produced forgery. The debate re-emerged in 1922, over 40 years later, when a Dutch philologist named Herman Wirth became preoccupied with the Oralinde book. In 1933, he published a German translation, and it quickly became a topic of fascination for Heinrich Himmler, a leading member of the Nazi Party, earning the book the nickname Himmler's Bible. Himmler and Wirth founded a think tank called Ahnenerbe. It was dedicated to promoting Hitler's racial theories, with a special focus on the idea that Germans were descended from a biologically superior ancient Aryan race. While some high-ranking Germans supported the Oralinde book's role in Nazi occultism, others rejected it. A respected expert named Arthur Hubner dismissed the manuscript as a forgery, and that pretty much ended Himmler and Wirth's use of it as a tool for teaching Nazi ideology. Most modern experts agree that the Oralinde book is a hoax, but nobody knows who wrote it or why. In 2004, Dutch linguist Goffe Jensma proposed that it's a parody of the Christian Bible. He believes it became popular after readers missed any clues that it was satirical in nature, and used it as a basis for spreading occultist beliefs. Number 6. The Oranatia Book. Sometime between 1924 and 1955, a religious work called the Oranatia Book appeared in Chicago. Nobody knows who wrote it. It used the name Oranatia for planet Earth, and its stated intention is to present enlarged concepts and advanced truth. The nearly 2,000-page book dives into some deep concepts about God, Jesus, the meaning of life, philosophy, science, and more. It aims to unite these things and is written as if it's coming directly from a celestial being. Unlike other accounts of Jesus, the Oranatia book states that Jesus was conceived traditionally rather than immaculately, and that he didn't perform the miracles the Bible speaks of. It describes God as the creator and upholder of reality, as well as a father figure. According to the book's teachings, God lives in a place called the Isle of Paradise, in the center of an eternal universe known as Havona, which contains 1 billion perfect worlds. Oranatia is described as a confused and disordered planet that is intellectually and spiritually behind compared to other inhabited worlds, due to our spiritual leaders' tendency to rebel and default from religious truths. The story of the book's origins claims that a couple named William and Lena Sadler, who were both doctors, were approached by a concerned neighbor whose husband fell into a deep sleep where he would breathe abnormally. He also spoke of messages he said he received from otherworldly beings, which he eventually started to write down. William Sadler never revealed the man's name, and he said that the book's author, the entity that allegedly communicated with the man, didn't want any humans to know who they were. A US-based nonprofit called the Oranatia Foundation published the book. When a woman named Kristen Mahira distributed free copies of it in 1991, the organization sued her for violating its copyright. A court decided that the copyright had expired and ruled in Mahira's favor, but the Oranatia Foundation appealed and won. Then in 2001, the jury found that the group's copyright was invalid after 1983. Some people believed that the Oranatia book is a hoax, which is understandable, given the cryptic nature of its author. Number 5. Smithfield Decretals. In 1230, Pope Gregory IX ordered his chaplain to put together a new collection of canonical laws, known as the Decretals. These were standard documents meant for anyone studying canonical law. They would have normally been very cut and dry, perhaps even boring. There are an estimated 675 surviving handwritten copies of the Decretals, but one specific copy, called the Smithfield Decretals, is noticeably different. It's filled with more drawings than any other copy, with most images depicting Pope Gregory IX with his supporters. But that's not even the weirdest part. The margins on each page were left blank so that future users could make notes. Around 1340, the Smithfield Decretals fell into the hands of someone in London or elsewhere in Eastern England, who paid artists to add more illustrations to it. They fill the margins with bizarre drawings that seem unrelated to the text or are critical of canonical law, including images of knights battling giant snails. At the time, this type of artwork was trending in England, but modern scholars struggle to understand most of it, including the pictures of knights fighting snails. which was apparently a common image that was seen in places other than the decretals. One theory, proposed by expert Lillian Randall, suggests that the snails represent the Lombards, a Germanic tribe who were seen as deceitful and treasonous, slimy if you will. But there's very little evidence to back up this claim, especially since the snails usually seem victorious in the drawings. Another theory proposes that the snails represent the people who have achieved upward nobility, who've climbed from a low-ranking social status to an elite position. The snail's victory could be seen as an ordinary person's defeat against a noble individual. In a Tales of Times Forgotten article, Spencer McDaniel theorizes that the illustrations are meant to be funny, that seeing a high-ranking knight defeated by a creature that was typically easy to kill was amusing. There are other unexplained pictures in the Smithfield decretals, including a fox dressed as a bishop lecturing to birds, bears fighting unicorns, and sexually explicit drawings, like a man grabbing a woman's buttocks, and we can speculate about their meaning, but it's unlikely that we'll ever know exactly what the creators were thinking. Number 4. Rohonk Codex. The Rohonk Codex is a 448-page manuscript that surfaced in Hungary during the 19th century. Its author is unknown, and it's written in an unknown language and writing system. Nobody knows where it originated, although it appears to come from somewhere in Central or Eastern Europe. Almost all the book's images are biblical in nature, containing elements of Christianity, Islam, and possibly Hinduism. They include depictions of Jesus on the cross, Moses on Mount Sinai, and more. The artwork suggests that the Rohonk Codex is about religion. Perhaps it's a heretical doctrine written by a dissenter, as von Klaus Schmeh pointed out in a German science blog's article. For over 150 years, experts and amateurs alike tried and failed to decipher the code of the Rohonk Codex. Some believe that it's an old writing system that nobody's figured out yet. Others have proposed that it's a hoax, or something that was written just to sell to a collector for a high price. Hungarian historian Karoli Szabo named Samuel Literati Nemes, an antiquarian known for creating forgeries, as the possible mastermind behind the Rohonk Codex. Nemes was incredibly skilled in his craft, and is known to have stumped even the most renowned scholars with his work. Most experts believe that the codex is fake. There's no evidence connecting it specifically to Nemes, and while several people have claimed to decode it, none of their theories have been accepted as facts. Number 3. Voynich Manuscript. Often described as the world's most mysterious book, the Voynich Manuscript is a 15th century codex written in an unknown language that hasn't been seen in any other known artifacts. Its author's identity is also a mystery. In addition to its bizarre lettering, the Voynich manuscript contains elaborate artwork depicting strange plants, naked women, zodiac symbols, unknown constellations, and more. The book has been discovered and rediscovered several times throughout history. It most recently resurfaced in 1912 when a rare books dealer named Wilfrid Voynich came across it. The Voynich manuscript has also appeared in the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II's personal library, and in 1903, it was sold at a secret book sale by the Society of Jesus in Rome. One theory holds that the manuscript may have been written in northern Italy during the Italian Renaissance. Some even allege that it's nothing more than a Renaissance-era hoax, or that Wilfrid Voynich himself created it. But without knowing what it says, it's unlikely that we'll ever know who wrote it, where, or why. Anyone who wants to try decoding the book can buy a copy, but even expert codebreakers from both world wars fail to figure it out. So good luck. Number 2. Codex Seraphinianus. The 360-page Codex Seraphinius was first published in 1981. Created by Italian architect turned artist Luigi Serafini, it's perhaps best described as an encyclopedia of an imaginary world. It's written in an imaginary language and contains more hand-drawn images of strange plants, animals, machines, vehicles, food, and more. One drawing shows a couple making love while transforming into a crocodile. Another shows a man riding his own coffin. Serafini explained that the text has no meaning. It's asemic, which means that it creates a vacuum of meaning that the reader is left to interpret. He said that he made the bizarre book to convey what it was like for him to open an encyclopedia for the first time as a young boy, before he learned how to read. While the writing clearly made sense to adults, he didn't understand it, and he designed the Codex Seraphinianus to reflect that sensation. Number 1. The Book of Soiga. Also called the Aldareia, the Book of Soiga is a 16th century book on magic. It was lost for centuries after the death of its owner, an Elizabethan mathematician and occultist named John Dee. A scholar recovered 2 manuscripts in the British Library Archives in 1994. The nearly 200-page book consists of incantations and instructions on summoning demons, doing magic, astrology, and other things. Some of it is written in Latin, but the final 18 pages contain over 40,000 letters arranged throughout 36 tablets. They appear to be some kind of code that hasn't yet been deciphered. After finding the book in 1551, John Dee tried to figure out what it meant by hiring a medium to consult the Archangel Uriel. The medium told Dee that only the Archangel Michael knows the Book of Soiga's secret meaning, and failed to decode any hidden message it might contain. Dee walked away without any useful information. At the time, he was trying to pursue his idea to establish a national English library for Queen Mary. Using his own money, Dee amassed England's largest library. In total, he collected at least 3,000 printed volumes and many manuscripts. Historian and novelist Deborah Harkness began her search for the Book of Soiga while studying John Dee's diaries. She found it in the British Library's archives under its alternative title, Aldareia Siva Soiga Vocor. Several other scholars had tried to locate the book before Harkness hit pay dirt. A scholar named Jim Reeds figured out the mathematical formula that was used to construct the 36 tables that encompassed the letters. He also identified errors that the book scribes made during the copying process, but he did not decode the actual content of the tables or their significance, which remain a mystery to this day. Number 8. Russian Family of Skeletons. A shocking discovery made at a site in Phanagoria offers a unique glimpse into a sinister family history. While excavating at a well-preserved necropolis in Russia, archaeologists unearthed the bodies of an entire family that dates back to the 5th century. Inside the crypt, the skeletal remains of a wealthy warrior were found lying beside his wife and their 3 children. All of the bodies were found in a confined space, side by side with pottery, placed on either side of them as offerings. So, what could have been the cause of their deaths? Could it have been an attack from the nomadic tribes? Or is it possible the family died from the plague? Multiple questions swirled around the archaeological dig, with experts realizing that because the bodies were buried so deep, more than 16 feet below the surface, it may mean the male was a warrior, which gave his family high status and would have allowed his wife and children to be buried alongside him with honor. A number of items found in the crypt gave experts more evidence that the man served in the city's army. Riding stirrups and spurs, as well as a leather harness attached to a belt that would have been used to carry a sword, were found on the male skeleton. Eagle-eyed archaeologists noticed that the leather harness and the buckles were very worn out, which meant he would have had to sheath and unsheath his sword over and over again while fighting. The capital of the Bosporan Kingdom, Fangoria, was an important center of trade between the southern Caucasus and Matoan marshes. Located at an important trade route near the Black Sea, it would have been an area that experienced a lot of turmoil and conflict, which may be why the Russian warrior was such a celebrated person to receive the honorable burial. It's also possible that the warrior and his entire family were butchered by the nomadic tribes, who often warred with the locals. Archaeologists will continue to study the remains and look for the telltale signs of either disease or violence to discover the circumstances that led to the burial of an entire family that remains a mystery. Number 7. Transylvanian Urns. It isn't that uncommon for skeletons to be buried with objects that either celebrate their lives or are to be used in the afterlife. But a group of skeletons unearthed in a 6,000-year-old Transylvanian cemetery had an unusual surprise for archaeologists. The deceased were buried with urns placed over their skulls, or sometimes their feet. Researchers who discovered the unique burials while working at the excavation believe they were offerings for the afterlife. the settlement where they were found was a fairly sophisticated one that had traces of wooden walls to fortify the homes of the Stone Age inhabitants. But the contents of the jars remained a mystery, with researchers unable to figure out what was inside. What do you think the ancient people would have buried with their dead? Could it be gifts of food, something that was often buried with ancient people? Or could the deceased have been fed a final meal before ritual sacrifice? With two different settlements found at the site, it's not that easy to figure out. One of the settlements was from the Neolithic era, dated to about 6,000 years ago, and the other was a Celtic settlement built on top of the original one about 2,000 years ago. Until researchers can determine whether there was food or drink inside the urns, we are left to wonder about the burial practices of ancient people, and if the offerings were a tribute or for them to use in the afterlife. Number 6. Early Cave Art. Deep in the Borneo jungle, scientists have identified ancient figurative art that depicts animals long lost to time. Inside a hidden cave, researchers found stark drawings that feature haunting ancient hand stencils that date between 13,000 and 20,000 years ago. Along with the strange hand illustrations, scientists also identified unsettling depictions of human figures painted onto the walls. Without much evidence of what happened to the Ice Age artists in Borneo, these paintings remain pretty mysterious. And unless scientists can figure out exactly how old the paintings are, they could be lost to time. As experts work to pinpoint how old the paintings are before they deteriorate, we are equally as excited about these examples of the world's oldest figurative art. Previously, older man-made images that have been found only showed lines and abstract patterns. So, many archaeologists were stunned to discover these paintings because they show that Homo sapiens in ancient times were well aware of not only themselves, but the world around them. Even more astonishing is the fact that this shift in figurative art was happening in the remote Borneo cave around the same time it was happening in Asia and Europe. But uncovering this previously unknown cave art was a grueling task for archaeologists who had to travel deep into the rainforest by canoe and backpack the rest of the way through the thick brush to get to the out-of-the-way cave where the stunning rock art was found. As they continue to study the hand stencils and other paintings found on the rock walls, researchers are experiencing the lives of the ancient people who left a lasting legacy deep in the rainforest. Number 5. Skeleton lovers were male. Some say that love never dies, and with the case of a pair of skeletons found in 2009 in the Italian city of Modena, a stark example of this belief stunned archaeologists. While digging beneath the Italian city, archaeologists came across a breathtaking sight. Two 1,500-year-old skeletons fossilized together and holding hands. With their faces staring into one another, it was a heartbreaking and chilling discovery. But there were more surprises to be found as workers continued to excavate. After getting a closer look at the skeletons, who had now been nicknamed the Lovers of Modena, archaeologists were in for a shock. Both skeletons were male. Originally, one of the skeletons was identified as female because it was wearing a bronze ring on one finger. But after testing the tooth enamel of both the skeletons, researchers declared that both skeletons were in fact men. So were they cousins? Brothers? It's possible, given the fact that one was wearing a ring, that the unfortunate skeletons belonged to male lovers. Surprisingly, this isn't the first skeleton pair to be found in such a position. Previously, two 6,000-year-old skeletons found in northern Italy holding hands were in fact a male and a female. Either way, the discovery of the Lovers of Modena shows that a bond between individuals is never broken, and love can indeed endure forever. Hey, real quick, if you're new to this channel, welcome. Thanks for checking us out. What do you think of the video so far? Let us know in the comments down below, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 4. Hidden Egyptian Crypt. It isn't uncommon for archaeologists working in Egypt to find previously unknown tombs and temples. But in 2019, while working at the site of a royal temple, archaeologists from New York uncovered a mysterious structure at the ancient site of Abydos. Once a very important city, Abydos is home to the tombs of several early kings. When archaeologists were working on excavating a temple, they stumbled upon a hidden stone walkway that would lead them to a building with a remarkably well-preserved cartouche. Understandably, the researchers were incredibly excited, and as they studied the cartouche, which is a hieroglyphic that shows a building or temple belonging to royalty, they realized that it spelled out the name of one of Egypt's most important pharaohs, Ramesses II. Found about 300 miles south of Cairo, Abydos has a number of tombs where pharaohs from the earliest dynasties are buried. But the discovery of this hidden Egyptian palace at the royal temple of Ramesses II is one that will change history. The very fact that Ramesses would require a palace in the ancient city shows that he didn't just see it as a site for temples and crypts. He saw the importance of having a permanent place to rule Egypt, and because of that, he constructed the impressive palace. It was no ordinary temple either. Its cornerstones were decorated with royal symbols, etchings that would help researchers to understand not only why temples of this period were so important, but how some of Egypt's most important pharaohs ruled their military campaigns to retain their power. Number 3. Ancient teeth. Large funerary temples aren't the only important historical finds made by archaeologists. When a research group in Germany stumbled upon a set of teeth, they didn't realize that they may be rewriting human history. Never before seen in either Europe or Asia, the 9-million-year-old teeth were found in a dried-up riverbed in Germany's Rhineland. Stunningly, the teeth resemble some that were found belonging to the first humanoid skeletons that were discovered in Africa. But how did the unique fossils get there? After sifting through gravel and sand in the riverbed, scientists unearthed the teeth, and after studying them further, they realized they may be 9.5 million years old. That would make them 4 million years earlier than the oldest hominid species ever discovered in Africa. But that doesn't make the mystery about how the teeth got there any easier to solve. The expedition leader was understandably puzzled about how the teeth so closely resembled those found in Africa that were 2.5 million years younger. Little did experts realize that after uncovering the mysterious teeth, they could quite possibly be rewriting the history of mankind. Because scientists were so shocked by the find, they decided to keep their discovery secret for over a year before publishing it. A director at the National History Museum in Germany believes these are the teeth of an ancient ape, but he still can't explain how the fossils that so closely resemble those in Africa were found in a river in Germany. Over the years, there's been a lot of fossil evidence found that showed great apes roamed Europe millions of years ago. But because there have been no confirmed cases found on the continent of hominins, a species that were closely related to humans, researchers now realize that the work truly begins to unravel the mystery of those ancient fossils. Number 2. Neanderthal fused to walls. While most archaeologists realize it can be quite a task to uncover fossils buried underground for centuries, they didn't realize that a discovery made in southern Italy in 2015 would reveal one of the most startling examples of ancient remains. Found inside the walls of the cave in southern Italy, the bones of an unidentified individual were unlike any other bones ever discovered. Found in a sinkhole, the skeleton wasn't what you or I might picture. The bones were found sticking out from the limestone rock. They were covered with stalactites that were left behind by water that dribbled down the cave walls to where the body remained. It took thousands of years for the growths to fuse the bones into the limestone walls of the cave. So when archaeologists uncovered the skeleton, they were shocked by the Neanderthal who was entombed in limestone by hundreds of small stone formations. Originally discovered in 1993, the skeleton is believed to belong to a Neanderthal whose DNA is the oldest ever extracted by researchers. But it took a lot of effort and careful examination for archaeologists to determine not only how long the body was down there, but whether it was a male or female who had unfortunately fallen in. It would take only a tiny piece of the skeleton's shoulder bone for researchers at the University of Rome to extract mitochondrial DNA, later matching it to other Neanderthal skeletons in their catalog. This gave them the ability to date the bones to between 172,000 and 130,000 years ago. As it turns out, that was around the same time when ice sheets were expanding significantly out of Antarctica and Greenland, which could possibly be the reason why the unfortunate Neanderthal ended up in the hole in the first place. During massive environmental shifts, it's possible that he fell into a cave that was lurking in the limestone underground. Luckily, experts were able to extract DNA samples from the skeleton, later realizing they had found the most ancient Neanderthal DNA that has ever been extracted. It may also give scientists new evidence into the evolution of hominids and how early Neanderthals moved across Europe during prehistoric times. Number 1. Gabiyan Mummy Caves. Many cultures around the world mummified their dead, but unlike the ancient Egyptians, who removed the internal organs of the deceased and covered the bodies in gauze, the mummies of the Philippines were preserved in a very different way, with fire. The Gabiyan people have a strange ancient rite to honor their dead. To preserve the bodies, the people of the Gabiyan region use fire to dehydrate and smoke their dead. Then they store them in caverns 4,000 feet up the side of a mountain. As death approached, the unfortunate individual who was on his last breath would drink a beverage that had a high concentration of salt that would help to dehydrate the body and start the drying process before they actually died. Then, after the person died, his fellow tribesmates would thoroughly wash the body and place it in a seated position over a smoldering fire that would help to dehydrate the soft tissue. Going one step further, those attending to the body would dry the internal organs by blowing smoke directly into the mouth of the deceased to help remove all of its internal fluids. The final step of this unique mummification process included rubbing the body with herbs and then placing the body into one of the caves. Even today, remarkably well-preserved mummies remain in the caves where they were placed. The Gabiyan people are a superstitious group, so they usually place their mummies in remote caves to prevent theft. But that didn't stop looters from stealing one of the mummies, like the one that went missing in the early 1900s. During that time, the body of the head of the Apu Anu tribe was stolen. Soon after, a number of natural disasters, including earthquakes, droughts, and poor harvest, plagued the village. Luckily for the Gabiyan, the mummy was later returned and reburied in the hopes of restoring the balance to the tribe. To prevent further thefts, the caves were declared a protected site that not only keeps the location of the mummies a secret, but also helps to prevent future looting. A striking example of a sacred burial process, the mummies are not only important to the tribe, but a superstitious ritual that still puzzles outsiders. Thanks for watching. What did you think of these mysterious archaeological discoveries? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time. Bye!